Hey guys, it's Linux Benchmarks here. I actually haven't done an intro like that before, but I wanted to make a video today about, well, my experience using Linux for about over like a year now. I've been using it daily. I don't even really have Windows installed. Like I do have it installed, but there's literally only one game installed on Windows, and that is Destiny 2. So in terms of me actually using Windows is like never basically, as Destiny 2 isn't really in a good place right now, and my friends and I have been playing just like other games like Overwatch and Valheim. Like I run a Valheim dedicated server, and we just play off of that. So in terms of me having to boot into Windows, I basically never have to. I do wish though that Destiny 2 did get supported on Linux. That'd be really cool. But in this video, I was just, just using Linux, and not just like people say using Linux, but I mean, like I have used like so many different distros over the past year. I've gone from, starting out with like Ubuntu, I think as all normie users, try. I actually used Ubuntu all the way back in 2016, I think, on my Dell 7559 gaming laptop, and I installed Ubuntu on it. I think it was like Ubuntu 1804 or something like that, and I actually absolutely like loved it. I loved GNOME. I loved the extensions that were applied to Ubuntu. I wasn't like well versed in Linux yet. I was just trying it out for like the first time, and back then like you couldn't play like any games. You couldn't, you could only play like native games. So you only play like Minecraft, Valve's native games like CS:GO, Half-Life, basically all those types of games that have native ports worked, and then probably maybe like a couple hundred games worked through Wine, maybe. But back then, Proton wasn't a thing, Steam Deck wasn't a thing, and where Linux is today, it's definitely like grown like so much. But yeah, just want to get off, not like sidetrack here, but like in today's video, I want to talk about 1 year after using Linux and my thoughts and like of me using it. Now, why did I move to Linux in the first place? Well, basically, I think at the time I was running Windows 11, and it was running quite well. I was actually running like the alpha and like beta versions of Windows 11 before it like fully released, and I quite enjoyed it, and I really did like how Windows did change the overall like UI and UX design of Windows, like trying to fit everything into the settings and not having to go to the control panel, and like the majority of like the UI experience was like rather smooth. It wasn't as bad as it was on Windows 10. But I don't know what actually made me move. I think I found out about Proton, and I found about like, it was like I had Linux installed on my laptop, my school laptop, which is actually on my bed at the moment. I bought the school laptop from the school I went to, and I installed Linux on it straight away just because I wanted to like test Linux, but I didn't want to test it on my main machine, and I didn't want to test it on a VM per se. And the laptop was really cheap. It's like what was it, like an i3 5500U with it has 4 gigs of RAM, but I upgraded it to 8 gigs of RAM. And it's like DDR3 at like 2000 megahertz. Not the greatest, and it has a really slow SSD, so installing Linux on it was like the best choice, I would say, with having like a smooth experience with like, browsing the web and that, because Windows on that laptop ran fucking horrible. So like I installed like Zorian on it, and honestly, when I was moving to Linux, I felt bored, because Windows 11 just felt so bland. It didn't feel, like the right operating system to use, in my opinion. It just felt, like even like sometimes like games, had issues. Games were crashing, relatively like common, I would say, on Windows. Don't get me wrong, games do crash on Proton, but it's very rare. I think the last time I had a crash on Proton was like maybe if I had like a bunch of other apps open and the memory was just like full and my VRAM like filled up for some reason, like the early days of like me trying out Proton, which was like around like a year or year and a half ago. But yeah, I honestly, I just felt bored, using Windows. It just didn't feel like I wanted to do something on my operating system, because honestly, before like using Linux and just using Windows, I was really avid Android user. I'd flash custom ROMs on my phone. I would buy phones that had like like high end to average specs, and then I would flash a custom ROM on it. So right now I have a Poco F3. It runs Pixel OS, which is like a stock Android ROM with like Google apps installed, and it runs like a Google Pixel, I guess you could say. But like usually this phone would have like MIUI. So I was already like an avid, like, I already knew how to install like operating systems and stuff on my phone. So I was like, well, Linux shouldn't be that hard. I should be able to figure it out and test it out, and so I installed it on my laptop, and and then I was like, well, Proton's getting really good. Why don't I install it on my desktop? As mostly every other piece of software works. And yeah, like the issues I dealt with Linux were actually like very slim. I would say. I've had like multiple times where maybe I've installed something from GitHub. I know I've done that a lot, where I installed something from GitHub and it completely like I install like a specific, I don't know, like patch or application that like bugs my system, installs dependencies that weren't supposed to be installed in the system. Like the first time I installed Ubuntu, I absolutely destroyed the repository. So I installed like a bunch of PPAs on Ubuntu, and a bunch of different dependencies installed, and it just fucked with all the other dependencies that were already installed on Ubuntu, and the computer just like basically stopped working, just having like multiple issues. So honestly, using Linux has been a very good learning experience. It's taught me a lot of things about the operating system and how it works, and how basically every Linux distro is the same. Because I've jumped across so many different distros, and yes, they use different package managers. Yes, they may have different like customization things, but in the end, you grab a package like LUTRIS, for example, you're gonna grab it from flatpak, or you're gonna grab it from .dnf, or a .debian file, or the AUR package, or like in the end, the app's gonna run. It's gonna require all these other dependencies, but in the end, every Linux distro is basically the same. How like Linux works and how like applications install. The other thing was I really had enough of using proprietary technology. In all my time of using Windows, drivers like Nvidia drivers, especially AMD Radeon drivers, I've had multiple issues after install of just trying to play games. And also the apps on Windows continuously bug you about advertisements to things with like AMD hardware or games or whatever that you should buy. I don't want to see that shit on my desktop. I just want to see this. Nothing, right? I just want to see my apps. I want to see my fucking, my notifications, fucking, like the music I'm playing. That's it. Like I don't want Windows to collect it. Sorry, I don't want Linux to collect anything. I don't want Linux to show any advertisements in any operating system. I don't think anyone wants like advertisements shown on the operating system. And now Windows 11 is doing that as well, like in the search thing on Windows 11. And then also when you first install Windows 10 or 11, it installs a bunch of fucking bloatware that you didn't ask for. Now in retrospect, Pop! OS does install a couple applications. Same with like Linux Mint and Ubuntu. They usually install the Libre Office apps, which is like just like like PowerPoint, the Office app, some other ones. But I was just saying, like I just didn't want to use proprietary technology anymore, as I had so many issues using it, and it would take ages for updates to come out with those drivers. Because they are proprietary, they're closed source, they need to hire people to fucking work on that project. Well, over on the open source side, there's thousands upon hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of developers that work on Linux every single day and don't get paid for it. But they provide so much permits to things. I've had an amazing experience with recently with using the AMD drivers on Linux, the open source ones like the RDV that uses Mesa. You know, that's been a really good experience, especially going past Mesa 23.1 and having GPL enabled. Just playing games and using my graphics card has been like amazing experience. Well, you know, like for example, I go play Destiny 2 on Windows, and it's like stuttery. It's loading new shaders. It doesn't load shaders. Like it loads shaders in a particular way on DirectX 11 games that like is relatively stuttery, I would say. While over on here with DXVK and GPL, there's no stutters. Now, of course, when I first installed Linux, I was using a Nvidia GPU. I was using an RTX 2060, and using Linux with a Nvidia GPU was basically fine. There wasn't relatively any issues. I know at the moment there has been a Nvidia driver update, the 535 driver, which has a bunch of random bugs and things that have been like disabled in a certain way that wasn't on purpose. Like how shaders load, and some games are like bugging out over it as well. So that's NVIDIA's job to do that, and that's what I mean by proprietary. Again, NVIDIA drivers are proprietary. If something breaks, or if NVIDIA brings out an update, then the developers over at NVIDIA have to go and fix it. While if an issue happens on the like a Mesa update comes out, you know, there's like an issue, then the Mesa developers, whoever's contributing to the Mesa, plus like Valve's engineers or / developers who work on the AMD driver, could easily fix it and bring out a certain patch. Then the distros, or all the distros have to do is just bring in that in their dependencies, in their repositories, and then you've got that update. So in the end, using NVIDIA has been fine, right? In terms of just, you know, plug and play is relatively easy. You just, you know, you install it through like a Ubuntu software, like driver manager on like Pop! OS. You can actually like boot into the NVIDIA version of Pop! OS when you like first install it, and it will install the NVIDIA driver for you. Or like Fedora, you just go to the GNOME software store and you select the NVIDIA driver and it installs. Like, it's that simple, and you can start using your computer. Now, I would say that like, you know, the software that I used before, I used Adobe Photoshop, I used I think I used Adobe Premiere for a little bit. I used Sony Vegas for the majority of my editing in terms of like making videos on my like gaming channel that I had. I still have. I don't really make videos on it anymore. You can go subscribe to it if you want to, but I don't make any more videos on it. But you know, like, so the apps that I used instead were like, for editing videos, I chose KDENLIVE as it's relatively easy and simple, and the KDE developers are relatively updating it every like couple of weeks or so to like fix things and introduce new like encoders for, like, you know, if you have like a Nvidia GPU. I think you can do AV1. I think you can only do H.265, which is fine anyways. But yeah, like KDENLIVE is a really good editor, and I've learned it like so quickly. And like, I think the first time I installed it, it took me only like a week to like get used to it. Yeah, other people may take longer to get used to this software, and I think that's one of the main issues with Linux, is that there is alternatives. Open source applications like, you know, Office apps. You got LibreOffice, you got OpenOffice for like making thumbnails and stuff, or like painting or anything. You got Inkscape, you got GIMP, and that was the other one. Like for Photoshop, I switched to GIMP, and that didn't take long either. I searched up a couple tutorials, and I learned it within, you know, maybe like a month, I would say. And yeah, that's what I use for making like all of my thumbnails now, and it's really it's been really easy, I would say. And when it comes to like other things, like, you know, music players, for example, if you have like offline music, it doesn't list the towns or suburbs, so, you know, I have to use it's relatively easy to learn. You know, I've teached you know, I've actually only teach like one friend to actually install Linux and like play games, and he has a Nvidia GTX 1050 Ti, and it's been relatively easy setting up games for him. He seems to know it mostly well now. I taught him how to install like Overwatch 2 on bottles, and then how to enable Proton on like Steam. But like, you know, using these like applications like bottles, LUTRIS, cartridges, that's another great app which stores like you know, quick launches, your games and launches from like LUTRIS, bottles, Steam. you know, any other ones that they support. Like I said, it's been relatively easy. You just got to learn, you know, you don't even really have to learn. Just use the latest WineGE, you know, Proton version, and that's relatively fine, you know. Like if you have an issue, just try a different one, right? If you're on Steam, then you just start off with the stable version of Proton. If the game doesn't launch, you just go to Proton Experimental. And if that doesn't work, then obviously the game doesn't work. Like it, you know, like the multiplayer anti-cheat that they use doesn't support Linux. Or maybe the game is truly like bugged, which I haven't really had an issue on that. I think only maybe like Halo Infinite has been the only case. But yeah, when it comes to like modding as well, that's a big one that people always talk about, is how to set up mods. And mods is a bit of a mix-up, I would say. Since you have Proton, a lot of game modding launchers don't work. I can't remember their names, but you know, like the ones that you usually use for loading mods on Windows do work on Linux through Proton, but they have some relatively issues. I haven't tried it in a very long time, but I know that I use one launcher. It is called R2 Modman. It is a great launcher for installing mods on Valheim. So see here, I have a bunch of mods already, and these are the exact same mods that you would use in the Windows version of Valheim. And this launcher is very similar to the other one, which is called like the Thunderstore, I think it's called, mod manager. But this mod is great if you want. You know, I can leave a link in the description if you guys want to grab it. Yeah, like other modding. I've tried Elden Ring, and I've used the multiplayer mod, and that's been perfectly fine. I've been able to play with my friends for like I think a total of 80 hours, and that was within like I think like 2 weeks or something. We played around like 80 hours roughly, which was a lot of hours, but we played it like every day until we finished the game, and it ran perfectly on Linux, and the mod did work. So you know, back to a while back when I was talking about Linux distros, you know, what Linux distros should you choose when you come to Linux? Well, you know, like I've bounced and hopped over all types of different Linux distros from all different types of like flavors, you could say. From like I started off with Ubuntu. I jumped straight to Arch. That was a big fucking mistake, installing Arch, because I didn't know what the fuck to install. I didn't know like directories or like where certain apps installed. Big no. There was a bunch of dependencies missing as well. So lots of apps didn't work properly. It's very much of a, I would say, a power user Linux distro. If you want to like tweak it and install whatever the fuck you want on it, piece by piece, like a puzzle piece. You know, Arch is definitely for you, I would say. Like Mutter, he uses Arch, and he thinks it's the best Linux distro experience you could have if you want to, you know, go a full deep dive into Arch. But you know, I've been using Fedora for a very long time. I was using Nobora for a long time as well, but I decided to stick with Fedora for a long time. You know, and that was a great experience using GNOME. I've used you know, KDE Plasma, and it's been relatively a good experience when it comes to you know, using those desktop environments. I would say KDE Plasma is definitely a bit more, not user friendly, but definitely more like it's got like a task bar. It may appeal to more users, especially if you're coming from like a Steam Deck, which uses KDE Plasma as default. You might like that a lot more. Because it like, you know, looks like Windows, I guess you could say, and you can customize the hell out of KDE Plasma as much as you want. And you know, GNOME, for example, I'm running Pop! OS at the moment, and this has been a great distro, I would say. I've been using it for like a couple of days. I think one of the best features about Pop! OS is that it has a restore function. So if you, example, yesterday, I accidentally changed my my root directory to read only, and I didn't know how to change the file permissions on the root directory with sudo and like the file permission commands that use the terminal. I did not know how to do that, so I basically just copy and pasted a command to change it to read only accidentally, and I went into Pop! OS recovery mode, and I was able to do a fresh what's it called, like it's called like a restore install, and it basically just backs up your home drive, your home partition, and then reinstalls Pop! OS and then you know, basically replaces the home directory with your backup home directory, and it basically restores like all your files, applications that were installed in the home directory. So like flatpak applications, which the majority of apps that I use are flatpak. So I reinstalled Pop! OS, and I only had to change like a couple things back, but it was mostly running flawlessly. So Pop! OS has been my main choice for now. I did have to swap out the Mesa version for the Mesa Git version, and I had to swap out the PPA for the kiosk PPA to get the Mesa Git version. And I also installed Xanmod. I don't even know why I really installed Xanmod. It's a great custom kernel, but it's not really necessary, I would say. Pop! OS updates their kernel relatively quickly, and you know, Pop! OS uses Pipewire, so I'm all good there with audio. And yeah, like the future of me using Linux is gonna be for a while, and I think it'll be my main operating system. I run it on 2 PCs now. Run on the server PC. I run Nubora on my server PC, and then which runs a Jellyfin server and the Valheim server, and then I run Pop! OS on my main machine, which works great, and I'm able to play all my games, any modded games. You know, I'm able to use Firefox or any other browser. I'm able to use Discord fine, even though Discord's like fucking super bloody broken anyways. And like Steam, and you know, mostly all my other games, except maybe like a couple games that don't work because they haven't enabled you know, Proton support with the anti-cheat that they use. That's basically been my experience with using Linux for like over a year now. So if you guys like the video, give it a like. You guys can subscribe as well if you want to. We are at 330 subs. I've gained like over like 120 subs in over a month, which is pretty insane to me. So thanks for the you know, new subscribers that have come in. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.